Okay, today we are looking and going onto the property of President Dwight D. Eisenhower's home in Gettysburg. Of course, we do know that Dwight D. Eisenhower was the 34th president of the United States of America, as well as during World War II, Supreme Allied Commander. Eisenhower was born on October the 14th, 1890 in the state of Texas. But his Gettysburg connections go all the way back to World War I, where he was stationed here at Camp Colt, which was on the original Gettysburg battlefield site of Longstreet's assault or Pickett's charge. The farm itself here is a very old farm going back to the early 1800s. During the Battle of Gettysburg, it was owned by a man named John Besecker, who rented it out to a farmer, Adam Bollinger. Over the years, there's been post-war additions of show barns and feeding areas and additions to the house and a putting green, as well as other outbuildings on the property, a guest house. But the only house that Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower owned in their lifetime was the house here at Gettysburg, which we're going to take a look at today as we go around the property. I mentioned the putting green because Dwight D. Eisenhower was an avid golfer and loved to golf. In fact, the Gettysburg Country Club was his golf course that he regularly golfed at. And I talked about that in an early video I did, which was the Eisenhower Farm at Gettysburg. So you'll want to go back and watch that video series where I talk about President Eisenhower and his golfing. President Eisenhower was also a classic car collector and an avid farmer. He loved horses and had some of the best show horses in the area. While President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower hosted many foreign leaders and dignitaries on this farm. So this is a very important part of not only the Civil War history of Gettysburg, but the post-war history, World War I, World War II, and so on. Some of the policies that were being hashed out during the Cold War were the result of President Eisenhower hosting foreign leaders from foreign countries and even Russia here on this property. In an early video that I did, it's also connected to this, which was the John Besecker Farm. We talked about the house and just its role during the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863. And it being used as a Confederate launch site for their attacks on July 2nd and in a fallback aid station. But today we're going to just concentrate on its post-war presence as the home of Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower. We're going to walk around the property and talk about the different areas of the property. And for anyone visiting, this farm is free to visit if you drive here by yourself, or you can go to the Gettysburg National Military Park Visitor Center and in the summertime hours and get a bus that brings you here with a package where you can actually go in the house. And we're not going to go in the house today because it's off season, but I will say going in the house, it brings you back to a time zone from the early 1950s until about 1970. All the furniture, the old style phones, and so on is all from that time period. So it's like stepping back in time. Now, as we walk to the house, the National Park Service has made this wonderful path. It looks like mulch. It's actually made out of rubber recycled tires, so it's very soft on the feet and it will not wear away. And it blends in nicely with the ground, and it brings you right up to the front side of the house. Now, on the rear side of the house would be B. Secker's Woods. I did videos again on the John B. Secker Farm. I did a video on B. Secker's Woods and one of the witness trees to the Battle of Gettysburg, which is in B. Secker's Woods. So you're going to want to go back and watch those videos. And as we approach the front of the house, you'll see that this was pretty much a self-sustaining farm. They had plenty of cattle for milk and meats and farmland to raise their crops and vegetables. And, they had beehives and bird houses that would provide the nutrients needed for good grass, good hay, and so on to feed the cattle with. Now, the farm itself goes back again, the house being built in the early 1800s and being purchased in 1851 by John B. Secker, who rented it out to a tenant farmer, Adam Bollinger, during the Battle of Gettysburg. After the war, the little structure there on the right was a post-war addition to the farmhouse, and President Eisenhower, this was their front door to their house. Again, it pretty much looks in that time zone between 1950 and 1979, when Mamie passed away. And by the way, when she passed away, the farm was deeded to the National Park Service. During the presidency and his post-presidency, Eisenhower here on this farm had a helicopter landing pad where he would travel to places he needed, like Camp David was nearby, and getting back and forth, of course, from the White House. There was a helicopter landing pad right here on the property. So the barn that I just zoomed in on, that was one of the finest and largest barns in Pennsylvania by 1950. It was built in the early 1900s, and by 1950, the little house that's in front of it there was a guest house. So anytime the Eisenhowers would have guests stay here at their farm, they had their own private house that they could stay at that was in proximity to the Eisenhower house and barn. Again, this was a self-sustaining farm. All the vehicles, he collected classic cars, antique cars, and all the vehicles that he had. They even had a fuel station here, and the fuel pumps are still here on the property today. So you get a good look at antique Americana fuel pumps. Now, both entrances and exits to the property were a very long farm lane that's got the white decorative fence, and at each entrance or exit there are also shacks for the United States Secret Servicemen, because again, after being a president, any president has Secret Service for the remainder of his life or his spouse's life. So if you drive in either here off of the Emmitsburg Pike or off of Pumpkin Station Road, you'll see those Secret Service shacks. Now, this is the beautiful bank barn that is on the property, one of the finest barns in the mid 20th century here. And of course, there again is the view of the guest house. Now, and this is the famous picketed fence that you're going to see. All Eisenhowers were known to have this style fence around their property. If you see this on Pumpkin Station Road, that's Eisenhower. And here is where a lot of the farm vehicles and personal vehicles would have been filled with gasoline. Again, there's a beautiful view of the barn. We're going to actually take a walk around the side of the barn there in a moment. And you're going to see some of the areas where these prized show horses, and later Susan Eisenhower, I'll post a picture of her with one of her favorite horses. Again, today this is a part of the National Park Service. In the distance there, you can actually see the Long Street Tower in the center of our on Confederate Avenue. So that in proximity where the farm is at. And of course, this would be the site on July 2nd of 1863 after Confederate General James Longstreet, some of his divisions from McLaws were in and around this farm, and they launched their attack, their July 2nd attacks, from near where that tower sits today. Now, here's the horse barn, and I will post a picture here as we get closer to the center of Susan Eisenhower, actually standing right here with one of her favorite horses. The Eisenhower house post-Civil War was repainted. Again, Dwight Eisenhower was an avid golfer, so there we're looking at his putting green. He spent many, many hours out here, and he found golfing very relaxing to him. You can imagine being the president. This is a getaway from the politics of the world. Right there, we'll walk back later, but that's where the cars are kept, the antique cars. Now we're going to walk around to the back side of the house. And one of the things I like the most about the house are these bells that they have. And they have the seal of the President of the United States. Now, the bells don't have a clapper inside, so when you go ahead and yank on them like I'll do here now, you won't hear anything. But they are real bronze bells with the seal of the President of the United States. I would imagine you could only have this bell if you were a current or former President of the United States. And again, there's a great look at the B. Secker Woods, which lines Confederate Avenue, and of course the back of the house. Of course, the Eisenhower Farm also had wind generation, so they were way ahead of their times, where they actually generated some, if not most, of the electricity for this farm on their windmill, which you can see, and we'll take another look at that later on. But I want to go down and look at the patio area. The Eisenhowers, of course, they like to bring guests, world-renowned guests, to their house. So they had an area outdoors where they could cook. They had a patio. They had a barbecue grill. And then, of course, since they grew most of what they needed to sustain themselves on the farm, they had a huge farmland. And they also had a bunch of greenhouses so that you could grow crops to sustain the people living at this facility, even in the wintertime. We'll go around the back side of the patio in a moment and look at those greenhouses as well. So this would have been the patio area, again, just on the side of the house where the windmill is, looking over at the house. And then, the outdoor cooking area is right here in front of us. And then there's an indoor, almost like a summer kitchen, just behind us here. And this would have been an area where the Eisenhower, and there's many pictures of them. They loved fried chicken, and Mamie was known to cook a very good quality of fried chicken. So much of that was done here. And as we walk around the side of this patio here, turn right, we'll see the greenhouses, and we'll peek inside this little summer kitchen here, which had sinks and stoves and cabinets. And then, of course, as I said, the Eisenhowers were known for their greenhouses. They had this very large greenhouse, and then there was another one that was gifted to them. And they actually have these little signs on the greenhouses talking about each individual greenhouse. So they were able to grow fresh fruits and vegetables even in the middle of the winter on this farm. So you can imagine the quiet and peaceful setting that was used here to, get the Cold War tensions and calm them a little bit when the Eisenhower would host world dignitaries and leaders from this home. And again, We're going to walk up here one more time toward the house, and look at the side of the house that has the windmill. And then we'll go over to the barn. We'll check out the area where they have their antique cars. There's a view of the windmill here, of course, as well as the addition to the early 1800s house here. And then we'll walk up close around here toward the front door. Now, Eisenhower purchased this farm, him and Mamie, in 1950. They had found this dilapidated farm on the outskirts of town and purchased it, and then spent years restoring it to the glory it has today. Some of the guests that I mentioned were here was Nikita Khrushchev, Charles de Gaulle, Winston Churchill, and then Governor Ronald Reagan. Now, this is the Eisenhower garage, which during visitors' hours, you can take a look at the original vehicles that, the golf carts, and including the 1955 Crown Imperial limousine, which was used by the President and the First Lady during their administration. Just on the other side of this building, we walked by it earlier when we were looking at the show horses, was the cinder block milk house, which was used by the Secret Service as an office space during his presidential years. And then when we turn here to the left, again, we're going to get another view of the guest house. So there's a photo of the golf cart that we just took a look at. This was a 189-acre farm. It had 600 chickens, 25 cows, and the Eisenhower spent over $250,000 to renovate the house and add some additions to it. A lot of this was from Mamie Eisenhower, who really took over. In fact, in frustration, President Eisenhower would tell the contractor, "For God's sakes, just give her what she wants and send me the bill." And again, this is a look at the guest house here. Small guest house, but still a guest house where guests could have their own. And then there is the 1887 barn. So we'll take a look real quick here as we end this video inside the house and then back at the 1887 barn. So thank you for watching this video. This has been President Eisenhower's Farm here on Gettysburg Historic Walking Tours. And I have been your historian, Frank Patrick Marone Jr.